The morning sun spilled across Naval Base Coronado, painting the edges of the Pacific in streaks of gold. Inside the mess hall, the air hummed with the familiar mix of metal trays, laughter, and the low rhythm of morning banter. Dozens of new recruits filled the room, all wearing the same dark blue fatigues, their hair cropped short, their boots polished to mirror shine. It was loud, alive, and confident, the kind of place where young sailors believed they already understood toughness. At the far corner of the room, however, sat a quiet figure, a woman dressed not in uniform, but in a plain gray hoodie and jeans. Her short brown hair was tied back, her face calm and unreadable. She ate slowly, silently, her posture unnaturally straight. Most didn't pay her much attention. The few who did made assumptions. Maybe she was a civilian contractor. Maybe a supply officer. Maybe even a visiting spouse. After all, this was the Navy. There weren't many women around who looked like that, especially in the SEAL training facility's mess hall. The recruits' laughter carried across the room, punctuated by jokes. About the upcoming dive test, about who'd fail the endurance swim, who'd drop out next. Some of them looked toward the woman now and then, curious. "She looks lost," whispered Peterson, a lean, sharp-tongued recruit, barely a month into basic. "Probably someone's wife waiting for her husband." "Yeah," another snorted. "Or one of those civilians who think they're part of the team." Peterson grinned. "Watch this." He got up, tray in hand, and swaggered toward the corner table like a man approaching a dare. The other recruits leaned forward, watching with smirks. The woman didn't look up when he stopped in front of her. Her fork moved calmly from plate to mouth, her gaze steady on the table. Peterson cleared his throat. Ma'am, you might be in the wrong place," he said, pretending to sound polite. "This hall's for active personnel only." No reaction. He tried again, louder this time. "You looking for someone?" Finally, she looked up slowly. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, something shifted. Her stare wasn't hostile, but it wasn't timid either. It was measured, sharp, and unflinching, like she was silently assessing a target. "Just having breakfast," she said evenly. Her tone was calm, too calm. Peterson forced a laugh. "Well, breakfast's for sailors here, not civilians." A faint smile touched her lips. "Are you a sailor?" That caught him off guard. He blinked. Yeah, of course." "Then eat your breakfast," she said, returning her attention to her plate. Laughter erupted from Peterson's table. He turned red. "Just trying to help," he muttered, stepping back awkwardly. As he returned to his seat, the cook behind the counter, an older man named Ramos, shook his head slightly. He'd been working the mess hall for 20 years, and he recognized that kind of calm. It wasn't civilian at all. It was military composure, the kind honed in fire and discipline, not offices or safe zones. Peterson sat down, pretending to laugh it off, though his pride stung. "We'll see who she's waiting for," he muttered. Across the room, the woman finished her eggs, wiped her mouth, and reached for her coffee. Her movements were precise, unhurried, like she'd practiced efficiency down to muscle memory. Her eyes flicked up now and then, scanning the exits, the clock, the reflection of the room in the stainless steel counters. She wasn't nervous. She was aware every second, every detail. To the untrained eye, it was nothing. To anyone with experience, it was unmistakable. She had training, deep training. Moments later, a group of SEAL candidates entered, still sweaty from morning drills. They filled the hall with noise-slamming trays, bumping shoulders, their confidence radiating like heat. They were young, strong, and loud, the kind of men who didn't yet know how little the world cared about bravado. Peterson saw them and smirked. "Watch this, boys. I think we got a lost tourist." The tallest of them, Kendall, followed his gaze and chuckled. "A tourist in this place? That'd be a mistake." They started whispering, trading jokes. One of them imitated her stiff posture. Another laughed about military wannabes. She didn't react, didn't even look their way. Her calmness only fueled them. There was something about a quiet person that made insecure men itch. Peterson leaned back in his chair, voice loud enough for her to hear. Guess not everyone can handle being around real soldiers. That got another round of laughter. Still nothing. She lifted her coffee, sipped once, and set it down. Finally, Kendall raised his voice. "You lost, ma'am? This is Navy SEAL ground." The woman looked up again, this time with a faint expression, something between curiosity and patience running thin. "Good," she said softly. "I was starting to wonder if this place still trained them." The laughter cut short. Her tone wasn't angry. It was factual, dismissive even. Peterson frowned. "Excuse me?" She simply went back to her plate. "You heard me." Now even the cooks paused. The tension in the room thickened like a storm before rain. A few of the older petty officers at the far end exchanged uneasy glances. Whoever this woman was, she wasn't some contractor. Her confidence wasn't learned, it was earned. Peterson tried again, now sounding more defensive than bold. "You know who we are?" "Yes," she said, taking a sip of coffee. "Trainees." That word landed like a slap. Before anyone could reply, the door swung open with a metallic clang. The mess hall instantly quieted. A man in crisp uniform stepped inside Commander Briggs, one of the senior officers overseeing SEAL candidate training. He was known for his steel demeanor and quick temper. He scanned the room, frowning. Then his gaze landed on the woman in the corner and froze. For the briefest moment, his expression changed from stern to stunned recognition. Then, without hesitation, he straightened, raised his hand, and saluted sharply. "Commander Wallace, ma'am." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Every recruit in the hall turned. Peterson's eyes widened, his throat going dry. The woman Commander Wallace slowly stood. She returned the salute with effortless precision. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and quiet. "At ease, Commander." The tension broke into stunned murmurs. Peterson looked like he'd seen a ghost. Kendall's tray clattered onto the table. "Commander Wallace?" The name spread through the hall like wildfire. Even the older officers were whispering. They'd heard the stories, the first woman to complete SEAL qualification after the program opened to female candidates. The operative who'd been part of Operation Neptune, Spear, the soldier who'd led an extraction mission in Somalia when her entire team was pinned down and somehow brought them all back alive. And she'd been sitting there, eating scrambled eggs while a bunch of trainees mocked her. Commander Briggs lowered his salute, still looking faintly embarrassed. "Didn't expect to see you here, Mom." "Just passing through," Wallace said simply. "Wanted to see how the new generation's doing." Her eyes swept the room. The recruits shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. It wasn't anger they saw, it was something heavier. Disappointment mixed with silent strength. She turned to Peterson's table. "You boys seem confident," she said evenly. Peterson opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Confidence is good," she continued. "Arrogance isn't." Then she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that chilled more than it comforted. "Enjoy your breakfast, gentlemen." And with that, she picked up her tray and walked out, boots clicking in perfect rhythm, back straight, head high. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared speak until the doors closed behind her. Peterson stared at his plate, his face burning. "That was her?" he whispered. Kendall nodded slowly. "Yeah, Commander Avery Wallace." The Iron Shadow. Someone let out a low whistle. "You just nodded off to a legend." The cooks went back to work quietly, and the room stayed subdued for the rest of the morning. The laughter was gone, replaced by quiet murmurs and a heavy sense of respect. Peterson didn't finish his breakfast. He just sat there, staring at the spot where she'd been sitting, trying to process how someone so quiet, so ordinary-looking, could hold that much power. He would never forget that look in her eyes, calm, precise, and utterly unafraid. It wasn't the look of someone trying to prove herself. It was the look of someone who already had. The mess hall the following morning had a different energy. The clatter of trays, the laughter, and the hum of conversation were still present. But now, every recruit glanced toward the corner table with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Word had spread quickly through the base. Commander Avery Wallace, the SEAL who had completed missions that many men wouldn't even whisper about, had been here yesterday, unnoticed by all but the keenest observers. Peterson, still red-faced from the previous encounter, sat with his squad, elbows on the table. "I still can't believe it," he muttered. "She was sitting right there. I talked to her." You what?" Kendall interrupted, smirking. "You tried to act tough and got shut down by a woman?" Peterson grimaced. "I didn't know. How was I supposed to know?" Across the hall, recruits whispered quietly to each other, excitement and fear mingling in their voices. "That's her?" one asked. "The one from Somalia?" "Yeah," another replied. "I heard she dragged 2 wounded men through the desert miles under enemy fire. And she didn't flinch once." Peterson shook his head. "And I mocked her. Over eggs." The group laughed nervously. Their laughter was uneasy, tinged with awe. Even the older trainees, who had once prided themselves on toughness, now glanced toward the corner with respect. Meanwhile, Commander Wallace entered the mess hall, her entrance quiet but commanding. She wasn't here for recognition, and she didn't need it. She carried herself with that same calm precision, scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. Her short brown hair was tucked neatly under a simple baseball cap, and her uniform was plain civilian clothes. She moved to the corner table, the same one she had chosen the day before, and sat down without a word. The moment her eyes met the newcomers, a silence swept across the hall. They stared, trying to reconcile the legend they had heard with the calm, unassuming woman in front of them. Peterson, who had spent the night replaying the previous day's humiliation, decided to confront her again, but this time differently. He walked over, tray in hand, trying to muster some confidence. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, a little too stiffly. Commander Wallace glanced up, her eyes measuring him carefully. "Good morning, sailor," she replied evenly. Her tone was quiet, but it carried weight, a subtle reminder that she was always in control. Peterson's palms felt clammy. "So, what brings you back here?" Wallace's gaze didn't waver. "Curiosity. And I like to observe potential," she said. Peterson swallowed hard. "Potential?" "Yes, potential. That which can be shaped into strength or wasted in arrogance." She returned to her breakfast, unhurried, ignoring the swarm of whispers around her. The other recruits weren't as brave as Peterson. They leaned toward each other, exchanging glances and low mutters. "Did you see her posture?" One whispered. "She doesn't even flinch." "She's not human," another said. "I bet she runs 10 miles before breakfast every day and doesn't even break a sweat." As the hall quieted, Peterson tried again, wanting to redeem himself. "Commander Wallace, I'm training to be a SEAL too." Her eyes flicked to him. "And what makes you think that matters?" she asked, voice calm, precise, almost clinical. He stammered. I've been through the drills, the runs, the divies." "Good," she said, cutting him off. "But discipline, observation, and respect are just as important as physical training. Do you understand that?" Peterson nodded quickly, feeling the weight of her gaze. Even the other trainees who had been whispering stopped, sensing the lesson unfolding. Wallace took another bite of her food, moving slowly, deliberately, like every motion was calculated. She scanned the room, eyes landing on the trainees who had been mocking her the day before. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to punish. Her presence alone made the room aware that they were not in control. A low murmur spread as one of the older recruits, Jenkins, leaned toward his table. That's the kind of calm you only see in someone who's been through hell. She's seen more than all of us combined. Peterson swallowed hard. The embarrassment from yesterday still burned in his chest. He realized that his attempt at humor had revealed his inexperience. And yet, there was a strange admiration growing inside him. As Wallace continued to eat quietly, one of the more brazen trainees, Lewis, tried to break the tension with a joke. "Hey, maybe she's here to grade our breakfast technique." The hall erupted with soft laughter. Wallace didn't react. Her calmness, her silence, was louder than any response she could have given. The joke died quickly, replaced with awe. The senior petty officer, Master Chief Sanders, who had been observing from the counter, finally spoke. "That woman commands respect without asking for it. Watch her, learn from her. That's a lesson most of you won't forget." Peterson's stomach twisted. He wanted to say something clever, to show he wasn't completely outclassed. But the truth hit him. He was completely outclassed. Suddenly, Wallace's attention shifted. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on a recruit struggling to carry a tray. With a quiet authority, she said, "Tray balance. Practice until it's muscle memory. Precision matters in every task, no matter how small." The recruit froze, then nodded, suddenly aware that her words weren't idle advice. Even small mistakes mattered to someone like her. Whispers continued, louder now, as the story of her exploits spread through the mess hall like wildfire. "Did you hear she ran 20 miles through the desert with 2 wounded men?" One recruit whispered. "She's the Iron Widow," another replied. "I heard she's led missions no one else would touch." Peterson sat frozen, realizing the enormity of the mistake he had made. The woman he had mocked was not just a SEAL, she was legendary. And she had been watching every move, every joke, every whispered insult, all without flinching. Wallace stood abruptly, signaling she had finished. She moved with quiet authority toward the exit, her boots clicking softly on the linoleum. Every head in the mess hall followed her. The silence she left behind was palpable. No one spoke until the doors closed behind her. Peterson finally muttered under his breath, "I can't believe I actually mocked her." Kendall placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't feel bad. You weren't supposed to know. But we will remember," Jenkins said quietly. "Everyone will. That woman, she doesn't need to tell you who she is. You just know." And with that, the recruits returned to their breakfast, subdued and contemplative. Conversations had shifted from loud boasting to quiet reflection. Something had changed in the mess hall. An invisible lesson had been taught, one that no lecture or punishment could have delivered. For Peterson and the others, the realization was humbling. Strength didn't announce itself. It didn't need applause. It simply existed, and when Commander Avery Wallace was present, the world noticed it whether it wanted to or not. By the time the last trays were cleared and the morning rush faded, the legend of the woman in the corner was already growing, whispered from table to table. Her calm demeanor, quiet authority, and invisible power had left an indelible mark. For the young recruits, it was clear, this was not a woman to underestimate. And if they thought they could get away with mockery or arrogance, they would soon learn just how wrong they were. By mid-morning, the mess hall had returned to its usual rhythm-clanging trays, shouting recruits, and the low hum of base life, but the air still carried a subtle tension. The events of the previous 2 days had settled into every corner. The story of Commander Avery Wallace, The calm, unassuming woman who had been sitting quietly in the corner and then revealed herself as a legendary seal spread like wildfire. Whispers passed from table to table, some in awe, some in disbelief. Peterson sat at his usual table, staring down at his tray of eggs, toast, and coffee. He was still red-faced from the previous morning, still replaying the way he had mocked her. His friends nudged him occasionally, teasing him gently, but even they were quieter than usual, almost reverent. "Dude, you realize she didn't even raise her voice at you," Kendall said, leaning back in his chair. "She just looked at you. And that was enough." Peterson groaned. "Yeah, and I'm never living that down." From across the hall, Commander Wallace appeared again. She entered silently, her presence commanding attention without a single raised eyebrow. No one needed to speak. Everyone knew she had arrived. The trainees immediately straightened their posture. Conversations dropped to murmurs, even the loudest. Among them, who had made jokes about her the first day, hesitated. Wallace moved to the same corner table, her movements precise and deliberate, as if every step had been measured in advance. She carried a small satchel, containing what looked like nothing more than a notebook and pen. Yet there was an aura of readiness around her, as if she could spring into action at any moment. Peterson, fueled by a mix of curiosity and lingering embarrassment, decided to confront her once more. He got up, trying to appear confident. "Commander Wallace," he began, voice slightly shaking. I didn't realize." Wallace looked up, her gaze locking onto him. Her eyes were steady, unwavering, calm, but there was an intensity there that made him step back slightly. "You will realize soon enough, sailor," she said quietly. Peterson froze. "Realize?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she set her coffee down, folded her hands, and scanned the room. Then, turning back to him, she said, "Every action you take has a consequence. Every word you speak carries weight. Every glance, every choice is observed, especially by those who have earned their place in the field." He swallowed hard, feeling the enormity of her statement. He realized that he had spent the past 2 mornings thinking this was all a game. He had been wrong, very wrong. Wallace's attention shifted to the group of recruits who had laughed at her the day before. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, measured each one. Then, in a voice that was calm but commanding, she said, "You all believe yourselves ready for the challenges ahead. But arrogance and distraction will get you nowhere. Today, I am giving you a test, not of strength or speed, but of awareness, discipline, and composure under pressure." The room went silent. Whispers ceased. Even Peterson, who had tried to regain some confidence, felt a cold twinge of fear. "You will pair off," Wallace continued. "Each team will navigate an obstacle course while performing tasks that require attention to detail. Those who fail to observe or adapt will face consequences, not punishment, but the truth of their limitations." The trainees exchanged uneasy glances. "Consequences?" Kendall muttered. "What kind of consequences?" Wallace's eyes swept over them again, lingering on Peterson. "You will learn soon enough," she said simply. The obstacle course was set just outside the mess hall, sprawling over a mixture of concrete, mud, and water. Ropes, walls, and balance beams awaited them. But this wasn't a test of brute strength alone. Wallace had designed several challenges to assess observation, decision-making, and leadership under pressure. Small, hidden obstacles required quick thinking. Subtle mistakes carried weight in real time. Peterson and his squad approached the starting line, nerves coiling tight in his chest. Wallace stood nearby, silent, her gaze sweeping over every participant. There was no cheering, no yelling. Her presence alone demanded attention. The first task involved crossing a series of narrow balance beams over muddy water. Peterson, still shaken from previous embarrassment, wobbled. Wallace's voice cut through the air, calm and even, feet steady, eyes ahead. Confidence comes from control, not fear. He corrected his stance, inhaled, and moved forward. Each step was deliberate. Failure to observe the subtle shift in beam alignment would have led to a fall, but Peterson adjusted, mimicking Wallace's calm, precise movements. Next came a series of simulated danger zones, where recruits had to navigate small traps while carrying supplies. Some trainees rushed, panicked, or laughed nervously. Peterson noticed Wallace watching, her eyes tracking everyone like a hawk. Her presence was invisible, yet palpable. Each misstep was noted silently, a lesson drilled into them without a word. Halfway through, a volunteer injured dummy was placed in the mud, requiring rescue. Many recruits froze or panicked, unsure how to proceed. Peterson remembered her earlier words. Every action carries weight. He knelt, carefully lifting the dummy without slipping, coordinating with his team. They succeeded. Wallace's eyes met his briefly, a subtle nod of approval, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a surge of pride through him. The final test involved a series of observations clues scattered along the course, subtle signs that indicated potential dangers or hidden instructions. Many recruits missed these entirely, distracted by the physical challenge. Peterson caught one almost by accident, realizing he was finally starting to see the world through her lens, calm, precise, and observant. After the exercise concluded, Wallace gathered them in formation. She didn't shout. She didn't berate. Instead, she simply walked along the line, assessing, nodding, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke. Some of you acted on impulse. Some of you froze, but some of you adapted. Some of you observed. Strength is meaningless without awareness. Power without discipline is dangerous. Confidence without humility is failure. Today, you learned the difference. The recruits, exhausted and mud-stained, absorbed her words. The lesson was harsh but unspoken. She didn't need to punish them, because her presence alone had taught more than any instructor could. Peterson's chest heaved as he processed it. The woman he had mocked days ago, sitting quietly, unassuming, had just taught him more about leadership and discipline in a few hours than he had learned in weeks of training. Wallace's gaze swept the room one last time before she turned away. "Remember this day," she said softly, yet every recruit felt the words echo in their minds. "It is not enough to survive the course. You must master yourself before you can master the mission." With that, she left the obstacle course area as silently as she had arrived. The recruits looked at each other in stunned silence, realizing that they had just been in the presence of someone who demanded respect not through fear or rank, but through competence and quiet authority. For Peterson, the lesson was clear. He had underestimated her, misjudged her strength, and mocked the very person who could have taught him the most valuable lesson of his young career. He clenched his fists, vowing silently that he would never make that mistake again. The legend of Commander Avery Wallace had grown that day, not through loud proclamations or displays of power, but through observation, calm, and action. And for the recruits of Naval Base Coronado, the woman in the corner had become a standard of excellence, the benchmark against which all future SEAL aspirants would measure themselves. By the end of the day, whispers of her lesson had already begun spreading across the base. Watch her. Learn from her. She doesn't need to say anything. She's already teaching you everything. The once rowdy mess hall chatter had turned into silent reflection. The young sailors had been challenged, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and morally. And they knew deep down that Commander Wallace would return, and next time, they would have to be ready not just for her, but for themselves. By mid-afternoon, Naval Base Coronado buzzed with activity. Yet the memory of Commander Avery Wallace lingered like a shadow across the mess hall and training grounds. The young recruits who had faced her in the morning obstacle course were still replaying her every word, every movement, every silent command in their minds. They had spent hours in mud, water, and exhaustion, but the mental challenge Wallace imposed, the one they hadn't fully realized at the time, was the one they would carry with them far longer. Peterson sat on a bench outside the mess hall, his uniform dirt-stained and soaked from the morning's exercise. He could still feel the weight of her gaze. Even now, his heartbeat hadn't returned to normal. He replayed the moments when she had observed, when she had noticed every misstep, every lapse in attention, without saying a word. The realization hit him with full force. He had been underestimating her all along. "What's taking so long?" Kendall asked, nudging him. "You're staring like she's going to jump out of the shadows." "She could," Peterson muttered. "And I wouldn't even be surprised." Across the courtyard, rumors had already begun spreading. Whispers of Wallace's past missions, her code name Iron Widow, and her status as one of the first women to complete Navy SEAL qualification echoed through the ranks. Every new recruit who had arrived at the base that morning had heard the name, but had no idea what it meant, until now. Inside the mess hall, some recruits had returned to finish their meals. Conversations that had once been loud and careless were replaced by hushed tones. Even the cooks moved more carefully, as if the air itself carried her authority. Someone mentioned the Somalia mission, the one where Wallace had extracted a pinned down teen through hostile territory while under fire. Another whispered about her award-winning acts of valor and the countless secret missions whose details were still classified. Peterson's eyes widened. She was really here?" he asked. "Yes," Kendall said softly. "And we were idiots." By early evening, Wallace returned to the mess hall once again. Unlike her previous entrances, there was a sense of purpose this time. She wasn't just observing. She was ready to make an impression that would last a lifetime. The room went silent as she stepped inside. The recruits, now aware of who she truly was, immediately straightened, some even gripping the edges of their trays unconsciously. Wallace moved to her usual corner, the same calm precision guiding her steps. She didn't acknowledge the stares or the whispers. She simply sat unhurried, scanning the room with the quiet authority of someone who had survived far worse than any drill could throw at these trainees. Peterson felt his stomach twist. "I can't believe I sat near her," and laughed. "You're not the only one," Kendall whispered back. "Most of us did." Wallace's eyes flicked toward them, sharp but not angry. It was a glance that conveyed everything without a word: awareness, judgment, understanding, and patience. She had seen everything they had done, the jokes, the mockery, the hesitation, and had catalogued it all silently. "Commander Wallace," Peterson said cautiously, approaching her with his tray. I just want to apologize for yesterday." Wallace looked at him directly. Her eyes were steady, yet there was a faint glimmer of amusement in the corner of her mouth. "Apologies are noted," she said softly. "But your actions going forward will matter more than words. Every choice you make from this moment defines you. Remember that." The room remained hushed. The other recruits were watching closely, realizing that Wallace didn't need to shout or punish. The very fact of her presence had already imposed order, respect, and awareness. Peterson glanced around. Other trainees avoided her gaze, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether to acknowledge her, unsure whether they were worthy of her attention. The irony was heavy. They had mocked someone who could have crushed them verbally or worse, judged them silently for their incompetence. Wallace shifted slightly in her chair. She pulled out her notebook from the satchel at her side, flipping it open to a blank page. Her pen moved quickly, deliberately, like she was writing observations about each person in the room. The recruits stiffened. Even small actions, reaching for a napkin, adjusting a chair, muttering under their breath, were being noticed. They realized in that moment that Wallace had trained her mind as much as her body, a combination that few could ever match. A senior officer walked past, glancing at the corner where she sat. Recognition hit him immediately. "Commander Wallace," he said, saluting sharply. "Good afternoon, Commander," Wallace replied, returning the salute with fluid precision. The effect was instantaneous. Even recruits who had just arrived moments ago felt the weight of her reputation settle into the room. It wasn't just what she had done in the past. It was how she carried herself in the present. There was no arrogance, no boastfulness, just unshakable calm, authority, and precision. The room understood now that they were in the presence of someone who had survived impossible odds. Someone who had commanded teams under fire. Someone whose discipline had been forged in the most extreme conditions imaginable. Peterson swallowed hard. The embarrassment from the past 2 days hit him anew. He had sat next to her, joked at her expense, and failed to recognize the magnitude of her presence. Now, seeing the other recruits react, seeing the respect she commanded without raising her voice, he felt small but determined. He would not let this moment pass without learning from it. Wallace finally spoke, addressing the room for the first time since she had entered. "You see me, now," she said evenly, "and you may be impressed. But I am not here to impress. I am here to ensure that you see yourselves clearly. You will face situations far beyond this mess hall, challenges that will test your limits. Today is about recognition of your weaknesses, of your distractions, and of what it takes to endure." The words were simple, yet every recruit felt them deeply. They weren't just a lecture. They were a commandment. Peterson realized that he had been tested not only in physical skill, but in character. Wallace didn't just lead by orders. She led by observation, by silent judgment, by example. A junior recruit whispered to his neighbor, "I never thought someone could teach so much just by sitting there." His neighbor nodded, eyes wide. "I know, I think that's exactly what she's doing." Peterson's mind raced. He had to process everything. Her presence, her silence, her words, the lessons she was imparting without ever raising her voice. He realized that Wallace's true power was not her combat skills, though they were legendary. It was her ability to command respect and instill discipline without force, a skill far rarer than physical strength. Wallace stood up, closing her notebook. She looked once more across the room, her eyes locking with those of every recruit. The effect was mesmerizing. Every man and woman felt as if she were speaking directly to them, yet her message reached everyone. "You are responsible for your actions, your discipline, and your awareness," she said. "You will be tested again. Do not forget what you have learned today. And remember, real strength is silent, precise, and observed by those who matter most." With that, she walked toward the exit, boots clicking against the floor with perfect rhythm. The recruits remained still, absorbing every moment. When the doors closed behind her, the hall erupted not in noise, but in stunned discussion. Peterson looked around at his squad, nodding silently. "We have to step up," he said. "We can't mess this up again." Kendall added quietly, "Yeah, we just watched a legend, and we didn't even realize it at first." That's humbling. Across the mess hall, the whispers of Wallace's exploits grew louder, spreading to trainees who hadn't been present. Stories of her missions, her training, and her unshakable calm circulated instantly. The legend of Commander Avery Wallace, the woman who could sit in a corner and command, respect without saying a word, was now etched into the minds of every recruit present. For Peterson, Kendall, and the rest of the recruits, the lesson was clear. The real measure of strength is not in bluster or bravado, but in presence, discipline, and observation. And in Wallace's case, those qualities were lethal, precise, and undeniable. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the mess hall returned to its normal rhythm, but the air had changed forever. The recruits had seen a master at work, not through shouting or demonstration, but through quiet authority and calm observation. The recognition was complete. This was no ordinary commander. This was Commander Avery Wallace, a Navy SEAL, a legend and a teacher of strength far beyond physical capability. The morning sun was just beginning to cut through the mist over Naval Base Coronado when Commander Avery Wallace arrived at the training grounds. Unlike the mess hall entrances, this one carried a deliberate air of command. The recruits, already assembled for morning drills, froze for a moment when they saw her. There was no need for shouting. The sheer presence of Wallace demanded attention, focus, and discipline. Peterson, still shaking from the realization of her reputation the day before, tried to square his shoulders. He had learned, painfully, that arrogance and bravado were worthless here. Wallace had made that clear, silently, and yet powerfully. "Listen up," Wallace began, her voice calm but resonant, carrying easily across the formation. "You've been trained in physical skills, in drills, in endurance. That's the easy part. Today, you begin learning the harder part, the part that separates the capable from the extraordinary. Observation, discipline, control under pressure, teamwork. These are the qualities that save lives. And these are the qualities I expect from you, starting now." The recruits shifted uneasily. They had trained for months, but this felt different. Wallace didn't just order them to run laps or climb ropes. She demanded mental engagement, awareness of every movement, every detail, every decision. "First exercise," she continued, "is a series of drills designed to challenge not your muscles, but your minds. You will navigate a course blindfolded, relying only on your partner's instructions. Trust, communication, and observation will determine success. Hesitation or arrogance will lead to failure." Pairs were assigned quickly. Peterson found himself partnered with Kendall, whose usual confidence had now been tempered by awe. Around them, whispers ran through the ranks. Everyone remembered her presence in the mess hall, her quiet authority, her reputation. And now, she was challenging them to match her discipline with their own ability to trust and act with precision. Blindfolds were distributed. Peterson adjusted his mask, feeling suddenly vulnerable. The world shrank to darkness, uncertainty, in the voice of his partner. Kendall's tone was steady, but Peterson could hear the strain in it. Every step became a test of patience, balance, and focus. Wallace watched quietly, moving between teams like a shadow, observing without interference, her calm eyes missing nothing. Peterson stumbled once, his foot hitting a low barrier. Wallace didn't scold, didn't even react visibly, but he felt her presence keenly and instinctively corrected his movement. Her silent observation weighed heavier than any verbal instruction could. After the blindfolded course, Wallace gathered the recruits, letting them catch their breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout praise or berate failure. Instead, she simply said, "Awareness is not taught. It is learned. You will make mistakes, but you will correct them. Confidence without control is failure. Discipline without awareness is useless. Today, you were tested, and some of you passed more than others. Learn from what you failed to notice." Peterson glanced around. Several recruits were flushed, exhausted, some sweating, some shivering in the cool morning air. The blindfold had stripped away the illusion of control they had relied on. Wallace's calm authority had replaced it with a silent lesson in humility. Next came endurance drills. Wallace didn't simply order them to run laps or climb walls. She introduced mental challenges alongside physical exertion, subtle distractions. Timed tasks while performing strenuous activities. navigating obstacles while reciting sequences of numbers or memorizing patterns. Every exercise required simultaneous mental focus and physical execution, a hallmark of elite SEAL training. Peterson felt his muscles burn and his mind strain, yet for the first time, he began to notice things he had never seen before: the precise angle of a wall's incline, the subtle shift of a log in the mud, the way a teammate's footing faltered before he spoke. He realized Wallace had taught him to observe before reacting, to trust his senses and his mind as much as his strength. After several grueling hours, the recruits collapsed near the water obstacle. Wallace gathered them around, her expression unreadable, but her voice carrying quiet authority. Endurance without strategy is meaningless. Observation without action is useless. Discipline without reflection is empty. Each of you has limits, but limits are flexible. You expand them only when you challenge yourself beyond what you thought possible. Today, you challenged yourself. Tomorrow, you will challenge each other. And the next day, you will challenge the world. Her words hung in the air. Unlike the loud, motivational speeches the recruits were accustomed to, Wallace's delivery had an edge of reality that was almost terrifying. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about truth. Peterson, gasping for air, felt a surge of determination. The embarrassment of the mess hall, the mockery of his peers, all of it had transformed into motivation. Wallace wasn't here to belittle them. She was here to teach them to see the truth about themselves. Wallace then introduced a final exercise: teamwork under stress. The recruits were split into squads, each assigned a series of tasks that required flawless coordination. A misstep would force the team to start over. Some recruits immediately quarreled, frustration spilling over. Wallace moved silently between squads, observing, making no corrections, letting the failures teach more than any words could. Peterson's team struggled at first. Miscommunication led to mistakes. Kendall's instructions were rushed. Peterson's hesitation caused delays. Wallace's presence was a constant, quiet pressure, like the calm before a storm. Finally, after repeated attempts, they succeeded. The moment of victory wasn't celebrated with shouts or high fives. Instead, Wallace's eyes met theirs, and she nodded slightly. That was all. That nod carried more weight than any medal or praise. By evening, the recruits were physically and mentally exhausted. Mud, sweat, and fatigue coated their uniforms and skin. Yet, despite their exhaustion, a subtle change had taken root. Peterson felt it in his chest, the shift from arrogance to awareness, from mindless effort to purposeful action. The day had transformed them, slowly but unmistakably. Wallace didn't linger. She dismissed them with a single instruction: reflect, learn, prepare. Tomorrow, the challenges will increase. Your mind must be as strong as your body, or both will fail. As the recruits trudged back to their barracks, Peterson looked over his shoulder at the corner of the training grounds where Wallace had disappeared. He thought of her calm authority, her silent observation, and the lessons she had imparted without ever raising her voice. Kendall nudged him. You see what she's doing, right? She's not just training us. She's training us to think. Peterson nodded. Yeah. And to respect the things we didn't even notice we were capable of. That night, as he lay in his bunk, Peterson replayed every moment of the day. The blindfolded course, the endurance drills, the teamwork exercises. Every moment had been a subtle lesson, a thread weaving awareness, discipline, and observation into his mind. Commander Avery Wallace had taught him more in a single day than he had learned in months of training. And he knew this was only the beginning. The legend of Wallace was no longer just stories whispered in mess halls or passed along with awe. It had become a living, breathing standard, one that Peterson and the other recruits would strive to meet every single day. By the next morning, the base was buzzing with a quiet electricity. Word had spread through the ranks. Commander Avery Wallace was not just a SEAL. She was a living legend. Her calm, unassuming presence in the mess hall and on the training grounds had transformed every conversation into hushed tones of awe. Trainees who had once laughed at her now watched every move, every glance, every word with unspoken reverence. Peterson arrived early, still feeling the weight of the lessons she had imparted over the past days. Kendall followed, their usual banter subdued, replaced by a shared sense of anticipation. Today, they hoped, would reveal more of the woman behind the myth, the story behind the legend. Wallace appeared, as she always did, quietly yet impossibly commanding. Her entrance wasn't flashy, but the effect was immediate. The mess hall and training grounds seemed to pause, waiting for her presence to settle. She moved to her usual corner, eyes scanning the recruits with calm precision. Today, however, there was a shift. She wasn't just observing. She was preparing to teach a lesson about legacy, history, and the weight of experience lessons that went far beyond physical endurance or mental acuity. "Gather around," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Today, you will learn about the history of those who came before you, the sacrifices made, and the expectations placed upon those who wear the SEAL trident. Understanding this is as vital as any physical skill you possess." The recruits formed a semicircle around her. They had grown accustomed to her presence, yet a subtle tension lingered in the air. They were eager, curious, and a little intimidated. "Many of you know my reputation," Wallace began. "Some have heard stories, missions, operations, awards. But what matters is not the stories themselves. It's the mindset, the preparation, and the discipline behind them. To be a SEAL is to carry responsibility far greater than oneself. You are not just trained for combat. You are trained to endure, adapt, and lead under conditions most cannot imagine." Peterson leaned forward, captivated. He had heard fragments of her missions, before rumors of Somalia, classified operations in hostile territories, countless rescues, but hearing her speak about them, stripped of embellishment, made the tales real. Wallace continued, "I was not always the person you see before you. I earned every skill, every award, every respect through failure, persistence, and constant observation. The first missions I undertook were far from glamorous. I learned quickly that arrogance is a fatal flaw. Pride can kill you when your team depends on you to make the right choice in split seconds. That knowledge stays with you always." The recruits listened in rapt silence. Each word carried weight, not because of rank, but because it was born from experience. Peterson felt a chill run down his spine. He realized that Wallace's calm authority wasn't just innate, it was forged in fire, tempered through danger, and honed by repeated trials that few could survive. She spoke of her first deployment. The team was tasked with extracting civilians from a hostile region. Equipment failed, communications dropped, and the environment was unforgiving. Wallace described how she had led her team through treacherous terrain, improvising constantly, balancing caution with urgency. Every decision carried lives on the line. Every choice mattered. "And when we returned," she said, her eyes distant with memory, "I realized that leadership is not about being seen as strong. It's about being precise, controlled, and reliable. The world doesn't reward flashiness. It rewards effectiveness, patience, and clarity of thought. You must carry that lesson with you." Peterson felt his hands tighten into fists. The embarrassment, arrogance, and casual mockery he had shown in the mess hall now seemed absurd. He had been measuring strength with the wrong ruler. Wallace's story reminded him that true strength was invisible to those who didn't know where to look. Wallace shifted slightly, her gaze moving over the recruits. "Many of the missions I led involved uncertainty situations where the outcome depended not just on skill, but on observation, patience, and trust in one another. These are the qualities you must cultivate. Physical ability will carry you only so far. Mental discipline, teamwork, and awareness will carry you the rest of the way. She paused. Peterson noticed that even the recruits who had been loudest or most careless in previous days were now completely still. They were absorbing every word, aware that they were in the presence of someone who had seen the world in its most extreme forms and survived. Wallace continued with a story from Somalia, a mission that had become part of classified SEAL legend. Her team had been pinned down by enemy fire, outnumbered, outgunned, and navigating hostile terrain. Supplies were low, communication lines were compromised, and lives were at stake. Wallace had improvised a plan, delegating responsibilities and maintaining the composure of a seasoned commander. The mission succeeded, but only because discipline, observation, and teamwork had been applied flawlessly. And that, she said, her voice calm yet carrying gravity, is what separates those who survive from those who fail. Not bravery, not luck, not aggression, though those play their parts, but preparation, awareness, and the ability to remain calm when everything seems to be falling apart. Peterson and Kendall exchanged a glance. They were no longer simply trainees. They were students of a master, learning lessons that textbooks, lectures, and drills could never impart. Wallace wasn't just teaching them about past missions, she was teaching them about mindset, philosophy, and the invisible principles that underpinned every SEAL operation. Wallace's final words that morning were simple, yet they resonated with the force of experience. Respect those who came before you. Learn from their mistakes. Understand that leadership is earned in silence and proven through action. Every day, you have the opportunity to add to that legacy or diminish it. Choose wisely. With that, she stood, her movements precise and controlled, and walked away from the gathered recruits. The silence lingered long after she left. None of the trainees spoke immediately. They had witnessed not just a legend in action, but a living example of discipline, awareness, and quiet authority. Peterson sat on the ground, absorbing the enormity of what he had learned. He finally understood that Wallace's presence in the mess hall, her quiet observation during exercises, and her calm demeanor were all part of a teaching method more powerful than any drill. Kendall whispered, almost reverently, "She's incredible. And I think we're just scratching the surface." Peterson nodded. "Yeah. And if we don't step up, we'll never catch up." By the end of the day, the recruits understood something profound. Commander Avery Wallace was not just a SEAL. She was a teacher of life under pressure. Awareness and discipline, a living example of the qualities every SEAL aspired to. Her legend was not in stories alone. It was embodied in her every movement, glance, and word. The lesson had begun. And for the recruits of Naval Base Coronado, life would never be the same. The following week, the transformation at Naval Base Coronado was palpable. Recruits moved with greater awareness, their focus sharpened, their gestures precise. Commander Avery Wallace had begun actively mentoring them, not through lectures alone, but by creating situations that demanded discipline, teamwork, and critical thinking. Every drill, every exercise, every casual interaction had purpose, and the trainees felt the weight of it. Peterson had changed the most. Gone was the brash, overconfident demeanor that had led him to mock Wallace in the mess hall. Now he moved with deliberate intention, observing his surroundings, thinking through every step before acting. Kendall, too, had learned to temper his impulsiveness. Together, they began to embody the lessons Wallace had imparted: awareness, precision, and patience. That morning, Wallace called the recruits to the training grounds earlier than usual. "Today," she said, "you will face a series of challenges designed to test everything you've learned. Not your strength, not your endurance, but your judgment, observation, and teamwork. Failure is not an option, not because of punishment, but because your lives may depend on it in the real world. The recruits were assigned to teams. Each squad had to navigate a complex course with multiple objectives, physical obstacles, mental puzzles, and real-time problem-solving scenarios. Mistakes were immediate and unforgiving. Wallace moved among them, silent, her gaze sharp, noting every detail, yet never intervening unless absolutely necessary. Her presence alone guided the recruits' actions. Peterson's team faced the first obstacle, a steep wall followed by a balance beam suspended over a shallow water pit. They had to communicate carefully, ensuring everyone crossed without mishap. Early on, missteps occurred. A recruit nearly lost balance on the beam, causing Peterson to step forward instinctively, but Wallace's calm voice cut through the chaos. "Observe before acting," she said. "Control before impulse. Plan before motion." Peterson froze, recalling her lessons from the past week. He steadied himself, communicated clearly with his teammate, and successfully guided the recruit across. The nod from Wallace was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried immense weight, a mark of earned respect. The second challenge was mental, a series of coded signals embedded along the course that needed to be interpreted in real time while navigating physical obstacles. Recruits panicked, shouting guesses, fumbling with the instructions. Wallace walked among them, silent, eyes assessing every reaction. When Peterson noticed a pattern in the codes, he shared it with his squad. Slowly, the team synchronized, moving in unison, solving the puzzle while negotiating the obstacles. Wallace observed quietly, her expression unreadable. She didn't praise them aloud. She didn't need to. The realization of accomplishment and growth came internally earned, not given. Next came a simulated casualty scenario. A recruit injured in the mud had to be rescued without further harm. Peterson's team hesitated initially, unsure how to approach the situation. Panic set in among some members, but Peterson remembered Wallace's repeated lessons. Observe first, act with precision, communicate clearly. They executed a careful extraction, moving the injured recruit to safety without incident. Wallace's eyes met Peterson's briefly, a flash of acknowledgement and approval that made his chest swell. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to others, but to him, it was a profound validation of his growth. The final challenge combined all the elements: physical endurance, mental acuity, and team coordination under a time limit. Early mistakes caused frustration, shouting, and near panic. But the recruits who had internalized Wallace's lessons began to guide others, correcting mistakes calmly, communicating effectively, and maintaining focus despite fatigue. Peterson and Kendall led part of their squad through a particularly difficult segment, a series of rope swings over mud and water while solving a sequence of mental puzzles. At first, they struggled, but Peterson remembered Wallace's words: "Discipline under pressure turns chaos into control." By mid-afternoon, the teams had completed the course. Exhaustion was evident on every face, yet a sense of accomplishment radiated through the groups. Wallace gathered the recruits, her presence commanding attention without raising her voice. "You have all faced challenges designed to test your awareness, discipline, and teamwork," she said. "Some of you succeeded more than others. Some of you discovered strengths you didn't know you had. All of you learned the value of observation, precision, and calm under pressure. These qualities are not given. They are earned. And respect is earned the same way through action, not words." Peterson felt a swell of pride. He had earned Wallace's acknowledgement, not through strength or bravado, but through careful observation, thoughtful action, and trust in his team. It was a lesson that would stick with him for the rest of his career. Wallace continued, turning her gaze toward the entire group. "Remember, what you've learned today is only the beginning. The challenges you face in the field will be far greater, far more dangerous, and far more consequential. Never forget that respect, awareness, and discipline are your most valuable tools. Carry them always. As the recruits departed, whispers spread about how Wallace had guided them, not with fear or force, but with example, observation, and silent authority. Even the most skeptical trainees admitted they had never encountered a leader like her. Peterson walked beside Kendall, mud-splattered, exhausted yet invigorated. "You know what's amazing?" he said quietly. "We didn't just survive that course. We actually learned something that matters." Kendall nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, and it's not just what she taught us, it's how she taught us." Every glance, every word, every pause had meaning. I think we're finally starting to get it." Wallace watched from a distance, her expression calm, eyes scanning the recruits as they left the grounds. She didn't need to speak. The transformation was visible. Confidence tempered with awareness, discipline under pressure, and respect earned, not demand, had begun to take root. Peterson glanced back at the corner where Wallace had stood silently, absorbing every movement, every choice. He realized that her influence wasn't about intimidation. It was about mentorship through example, a style so subtle yet so powerful that it left an indelible mark. That evening, in the mess hall, the recruits shared their experiences quietly, recounting the challenges and their lessons. No jokes, no mockery, only reflection, respect, and admiration. The legend of Wallace had evolved from whispers of past exploits to living inspiration. Peterson knew that the real test was still ahead. What he had learned under Wallace's guidance would be meaningless if not applied in the real world. And yet, he felt a newfound confidence, a quiet certainty that he could face whatever challenges came next, because he had begun to understand the lessons of discipline, observation, and respect that Commander Avery Wallace demanded and earned. For the recruits of Naval Base Coronado, Wallace's mentorship had become more than training. It had become a lifestyle, a mindset, and a standard they could strive to embody. And Peterson, who had once mocked her, had become one of her most attentive students, understanding at last that true respect is earned through action, not words. The morning sun over Naval Base Coronado cast long shadows across the training grounds, illuminating the final day of Commander Avery Wallace's intensive mentorship. The recruits, now seasoned by the challenges she had imposed, moved with purpose, coordination, and awareness that had been absent just a week ago. Mud-streaked uniforms and exhausted expressions masked a quiet pride they had grown, transformed under Wallace's silent authority. Peterson adjusted his gear and took a deep breath. The lessons of the past days, the blindfolded courses, endurance drills, teamwork under pressure, mental puzzles, and observation exercises had all coalesced into one truth. Wallace's mentorship was unparalleled, and her expectations were a benchmark for excellence. Wallace appeared as she always did, quietly, deliberately. Her presence alone commanded attention. The recruits straightened instinctively, every motion deliberate and disciplined. There was no shouting, no barking of orders, just calm authority that spoke louder than any words could. "Today," she said, her voice steady and precise, "you will face the culmination of everything we've covered. Not a single element of this exercise is accidental. Each task is designed to test endurance, observation, teamwork, and the lessons you've absorbed. You will emerge either stronger and wiser, or you will discover the limits you have yet to overcome." Peterson and his squad exchanged glances. They were ready. For the first time, he felt the quiet confidence Wallace had been teaching: control, awareness, and composure under pressure. Every movement had purpose. Every decision carried consequence. The course was brutal. Physical obstacles demanded precision. Mental tasks demanded attention. Team coordination demanded communication and trust. Early mistakes were made hesitation, miscommunication, but the recruits corrected themselves, relying on the training Wallace had instilled. Peterson led his team across a series of rope bridges while simultaneously decoding a sequence of hidden markers. He noticed subtle shifts in the terrain, the precise timing of his teammates' movements, and small mistakes that could have derailed them. Each observation, each correction, was a testament to Wallace's teaching. Awareness under pressure could save lives. Kendall, usually impulsive, now guided a struggling teammate with calm authority. There was no panic, no shouting, just deliberate instruction, observation, and patience. Wallace's lessons had taken root. At the final obstacle, a simulated casualty scenario combined physical, mental, and leadership challenges. A wounded recruit had to be extracted while navigating unstable terrain, solving a puzzle under time constraints, and coordinating team movements. Many squads faltered, but Peterson's team executed flawlessly. Every step had been calculated, every decision deliberate, every action observed. Wallace watched silently from a distance. Her eyes scanned the recruits, taking note of every success and mistake. Then, for the first time, she smiled, a small, rare acknowledgement that carried the weight of approval. "Effective leadership is not measured by your ability to dominate," she said calmly once the exercises concluded. "It is measured by your ability to observe, adapt, and guide others under conditions of stress and uncertainty. Today, you have demonstrated growth. But remember, growth is only meaningful if it is continuous. Never stop learning. Never stop observing. Never stop striving for excellence." Peterson felt a rush of pride. He had earned her acknowledgement, not through arrogance or bravado, but through careful observation, thoughtful action, and trust in his team. Wallace's methods had transformed him and the other recruits into individuals, capable of facing challenges they hadn't imagined possible. As the recruits gathered, Wallace addressed them once more. "My time here has come to an end. You have been tested, challenged, and guided. But my departure is not an end, it is the beginning. Take the lessons, the discipline, and the awareness you have cultivated, and carry them into every aspect of your career. Remember that respect is earned, not demanded. Leadership is proven, not assumed. And strength is measured not only by what you can do, but by how you inspire others to achieve their best." The recruits stood in silence, absorbing the gravity of her words. They had witnessed a living legend, not through tales of heroism, but through action, mentorship, and presence. Wallace's influence was more powerful than any speech, medal, or public recognition. It was a transformation that lived inside them now. Peterson stepped forward, swallowing hard. "Commander Wallace, thank you for everything. I don't know if words can express what we've learned, but we'll carry it forward. I promise." Wallace's eyes softened just slightly. "Actions will speak louder than words. Lead by example, observe carefully, and trust your training. That is all the acknowledgement I need." One by one, the recruits saluted. Wallace returned the salute, measured and precise, and then turned to leave the training grounds. She walked with the same deliberate calm that had defined her presence from the very beginning. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the recruits remained in formation, reflecting on the past days. Conversations were quiet, thoughtful, full of reflection. For the first time, they understood that true strength is silent, measured, and observed through action. Peterson watched Wallace disappear from view, a mix of gratitude, awe, and determination filling him. He felt the weight of her lessons settle in his chest. She had taught them more than physical endurance or mental puzzles. She had taught them discipline, awareness, leadership, and respect. Kendall nudged him quietly. "You feel it, right? She's changed us permanently." Peterson nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Yeah, and I think we'll spend the rest of our careers trying to live up to her example. By the next day, the legend of Commander Avery Wallace had grown even stronger. Stories of her calm authority, her mentorship, and the subtle yet profound lessons she imparted spread across the base. Recruits and instructors alike spoke in hushed tones of the woman who had transformed a room simply by being herself, by observing, guiding, and demanding excellence through example. The true legacy Wallace left behind was not just in medals or missions, but in the minds and hearts of those she had trained. Every step the recruits took carried a piece of her influence, the quiet discipline, the relentless observation, the calm authority, and the understanding that real respect is earned, not demanded. Peterson, Kendall, and the others returned to their routines, but everything had changed. They moved with awareness, spoke with intention, and approached challenges with a measured calm they hadn't known before. Wallace had set a standard that would define their careers, their leadership, and their lives. Even after she had left, her presence lingered. In the mess hall, the training grounds, and every quiet corner of the base, recruits remembered the lessons she had taught. Observe, act with precision, respect earned, and strength measured by discipline, not noise. And as for Peterson, he understood now that the woman he had once mocked was no ordinary commander. She was a Navy SEAL, a living legend, and a mentor whose influence would shape generations of sailors long after she had walked away. Commander Avery Wallace had arrived quietly, sat silently, and left an indelible mark on every recruit she encountered. She had proven, beyond doubt, that true power is measured not by intimidation or force, but by presence, discipline, and the ability to transform others through example. And with that, the legend of the Navy SEAL, who could sit in the corner and command respect without saying a word, became eternal, etched into the hearts and minds of all who had the privilege to witness it.